Um, I want to thank the organizers and the participants and the panelists here for what I think have been very successful discussions today. And I'm going to shift the focus a little bit and talk more directly about the ways that universities and governments can partner, because I think those are two key pieces of the innovation ecosystem. And as Kathy mentioned, and as we have heard before, the innovation ecosystem is a very complex mechanism. Technology commercialization and technology localization is a highly complex process. And this is just a small part of that. So in the US, and I think everywhere else, when you think about technology commercialization and technology localization, the immediate benefit is in the region. And when you think about who has the immediate benefit, the question then becomes who should invest in the ecosystem. There are several types of regional or state government initiatives that can support technology transfer and technology localization. For example, gap funding, organizations to support entrepreneurial activities, investing in infrastructure to enhance the ecosystem, encouraging private sector university interactions, removing legal barriers to those interactions is very important, and also working with universities to create a culture where industry is welcome and supported is also very important. I'm going to talk really about two specific areas. One is technology development. And technology development is critical in terms of localization as well as commercialization. So we've heard several times today that knowledge leads to innovation and research leads to knowledge. And universities are the engines for research. But one of the things that happens is that the research that takes place at a university is usually very basic in nature. A lot of basic research doesn't have immediate commercial applications. And so where you find those applications, those projects need to be developed to a point where the commercialization or the localization can be realized. And one of the ways that universities participate in this is through gap funding programs. And they can be partnerships between universities and local companies. They have, the gap funding programs have well-defined objectives. Sometimes there are matching contributions, there's matching funds, usually a competitive process within the institution, and awards range from anywhere between $25 to $2,000 in the US. Now, these funds come from the state or regional government. And the idea is that the regional government is going to provide these grants to local companies and local universities to partner and further that technology. In addition to state grants, you also have supporting organizations, which can be angel funds, small business development organizations, entrepreneurial training and mentoring programs, all done in partnership between government and university. These are all sort of components that work together in order to enhance the ecosystem and support entrepreneurial enterprises. I'm going to use some examples of programs that I have selected out of many programs in the US just to try to illustrate the impact of these types of programs. So one of the programs that I was actually personally associated with was the Utah Technology Commercialization and Innovation Program, which started in 1986 as the Centers of Excellence Program. And the idea for the thought behind that program was to accelerate the commercialization of technologies by investing in technology development. And the total amount of funding available for that program was about $2 million a year, and there were anywhere between 20 to 30, sometimes 40 projects that were supported. That program, since 1986, has resulted in over 150 startup companies, all located in Utah, in and around Salt Lake City, which is the capital, and over 2,000 jobs. Now, when you think about the numbers, it doesn't seem like a lot of numbers, but when you look at the impact of that, the impact is much, much more. These 150 startup companies were not only responsible for the 200 jobs, but they brought in a lot of capital investment. They have created a culture of innovation in IT. They've created a culture of innovation in biosciences. They've created a culture of innovation in diagnostics. And so when you take a look at the development of these industrial sectors, that is something that you can really point to where the program had a direct impact. The Maryland Industrial Partnership is another program which is almost as old, and as the numbers illustrate, it has also had a significant impact. And again, the Alabama Launchpad, which is not as old, it's only about 10 years old, again, has had significant impact. Now, the focus for these programs is to encourage regional development. The focus is to encourage university-industry partnerships, and the focus is to encourage startup development. Because when we talk about economic development, it is easy to say that we need to recruit companies to bring more jobs into the region. But there actually needs to be a combination of efforts so that there are infrastructure and resources to not only recruit companies, but also grow companies. And when you start growing companies in developing sectors, it actually becomes easier to recruit companies. The second point that I'm going to talk about in terms of the role of regional and state government is infrastructure. And it's easy to take a look at the US and point to Harvard, MIT, Stanford, University of North Carolina, where there is a lot of infrastructure already in place. And I remember talking with visitors that I have hosted, and the question they ask is, how can we be like Stanford? And a good friend of mine who is the director of the Technology Transfer Office there, Kathy Koo, has always said, well, give yourselves 100 years, because that's what it took to develop the ecosystem around Stanford. So, as Kathy said, you have to give this time. You have to bring the right resources into developing the ecosystem, and part of that is the infrastructure. And the infrastructure, I think, is something where the state can play a significant role in terms of incubators, in terms of accelerators, science parks, business parks, funding mentoring services, because faculty are really good at research. Faculty entrepreneurs are not good at business. So there needs to be a confluence of many things in order to make and help success. Right now, there are over 1,400 incubators in the U.S., and 30% of them are operated by universities. The others are a combination of private as well as nonprofits. And it's important, that statistic is important because they're close to the engines of knowledge, the sources of ideas. Again, using some examples that I've collected when you take a look at the numbers coming out from North Dakota, and the reason why I picked these particular examples is to illustrate that you can have a huge impact in the region, and you don't have to be Stanford or MIT or Harvard or North Carolina. And the lesson to take away from this is exactly what Kathy said. You have to have the right recipe for your region. If you have the right components and the right recipe for your region, it will result in success. You have to understand what the entrepreneurs want. You have to understand what resources are available and how to fill those gaps. I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices and successes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. There's more information in the papers that are provided in your packet. And also, I just got my 2-minute warning, and it's very hard to be the last speaker before the break. So, best practices for state programs need to have clearly defined objectives. What is the state trying to achieve? What is that program trying to achieve? How is that program going to be implemented? Who are your clients? Is it the universities? Is it the startup companies? Is it faculty members? Is it student entrepreneurs? Because each of them have different expectations. And you could combine all of these and say we have programs to satisfy a number of clients, but you have to define what your client base is. You need to have appropriate budgets and staff. All of these programs require administration. You cannot administer these without appropriate resources. You need to have management practices. One of the things that I actually feel is probably the most critical in these programs are the advisory boards. And these are people who are entrepreneurs, investors, and industry, as well as academics, who come together. And I think it was in the previous, actually Kathy mentioned this, which is you need to have diversity. And that diversity in the advisory board actually encourages that innovation, that entrepreneurship, the generation of ideas, the mentoring. You need to make sure that you collect the data so you can evaluate your performance. You need to cultivate multiple funding sources, so whether they're grants from government or whether they're investment from venture capital or angel investors. And one of the key things is when you're funding these projects, you need to define the business case. If you don't define the business case for these projects and help the faculty understand what the business case is, you will actually not be spending your money wisely. And we all know we want to do that. So I'm going to conclude my remarks at this point, and thank you very much.